Welcome to Football Never Sleeps, the outgrowth of our Monday Night Live in-season YouTube show. This is our off-season show focusing on Notre Dame football. And this week, buyouts and lots of other things. Enough of that right now. We'll get to that in a minute. We'll do this weekly through at least the end of spring practice, which is the April 22nd Blue Gold game. The reason you really want to sign up for notifications and subscribing to us, which doesn't cost you a cent, is that we move the show around depending on the news flow. Today it happened to be Monday, but we've been on all different kinds of days of the week. So subscribe, sign up for the notifications. The other thing is we also want to get you to participate with us. We want to take your questions, so start filling up the question portal, and we'll work those in as we get to the different topics, depending on what your question is. And now Tyler gets a chance to talk. This is Tyler James, and I'm Eric Hansen, but it says that on our little name tags.
Well, thank you for the stellar introduction, Eric. We have some questions already submitted, so thank you, Jerry McClurg and Michael Collins. I know we have at least one series of questions that was submitted to us on the Inside Lounge message board, and hopefully we get some more from everyone tuning in. So thank you for tuning in. I don't know that our presentation will be as compelling or as intriguing as Marcus Freeman's and Gerad Parker's was earlier Monday, but we hope to clue you in on anything that happened today that you may not be aware of or how we got to today. So I know there's plenty of questions out there, but we will try to keep it as on topic as possible. But it doesn't have to be a question about Gerad Parker either. We would be happy to answer other questions as well. But before we get to some of your questions, Eric, why don't you go ahead and get us started with maybe some of the highlights from Gerad Parker's press conference earlier today.
Right. So today, Notre Dame had Marcus Freeman, head coach at Notre Dame, the new offensive coordinator, Gerad Parker. He got a chance to do a Q&A with Notre Dame. So we found out a lot about Gerad Parker today. I think that we didn't know. You know, the media, we've interviewed Gerad before, not a lot, but usually about how good is Michael Mayer, and also we'd ask him about the young tight ends, but really never through the lens of offensive philosophy and things like that. So we got a taste of that today. We got a taste of his past and the interview process and what his vision for the future is and how he's going to be able to collaborate with the other members of the offensive staff. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I also thought we learned a lot about Marcus Freeman today, about how much more involved he is in the offense, how much more of conceptually he knows this is what I want to run. Remember a year ago, he was like, I'm good with what Tommy Rees is running. And now he has a really clear idea of how he wants this offense to evolve. I mean, even down to some of the nuances. And I thought that was pretty interesting. We also kind of saw him be aggressive in terms of all the gray area that happened during the search, which really centered on offensive coordinator Andy Ludwig from Utah. And we're going to get to that a little bit later. I really want to go front and center first with the impressions of Parker and Freeman. So we're going to start with Tyler a little bit first here because he wrote about Parker. I wrote more about the Freeman part of this. So what were your maybe main takeaways from what you learned about Gerad Parker today?
Yeah, I mean, it was nice to get some clarity, although it's not exactly everything in terms of how things went during his West Virginia tenure. That has been a little bit assumed and maybe not as transparent. And I think that was West Virginia's intent while during that part of Neil Brown's tenure in terms of who was calling plays and how that was evolving. Gerad Parker spoke to that in some ways. He said that he was running meetings and everything his first year, but he wasn't necessarily calling plays. He did call some plays in the red zone, which is something I had mentioned. I don't know if it was on a podcast or something that I had heard previously. So that was a role that he played there. And then there was some opportunities for him to be the play caller for certain games. He didn't specify which games, and I think wanted to keep that close to the vest about how that went. But that at least gives us a little bit more information to go on in terms of what his experience is as a play caller. But I think overall, we're still going to, I mean, we're going to be continuing to learn what his offense is going to look like. I don't think the West Virginia offense is necessarily what Notre Dame's offense will look like. I think it's interesting to me just when you think about all the different kinds of offenses he's been around, whether it's spread offenses, more pro style offenses, offenses that rely heavily on RPOs, offenses that rely on tight ends. Has a lot of experience. He's coached wide receivers. He's coached running backs. He's coached tight ends. So I'm most curious about how this like potpourri of experience, like what does that equal? What does that smell like as offensive coordinator?
Well, hopefully it doesn't have an odor.
So I think that is it's still all, I mean, today was more like philosophy based than it was X's and O's. Like he was talking about what he wants this offense to look like and how he wants them to approach things. I appreciated that he named one standard we're going to go by. It's like, hey, we want to score more points than we scored by last year. I know that's simple to say, but to just sort of address that, he certainly walked a fine line and not trying to sort of downplay anything that Tommy Rees did and wanting to like explain like this is why I'm going to be better than Tommy Rees. Like that was not a part of his pitch today in explaining what he expects from Notre Dame's offense. But he talked about maybe experimenting with different things and figuring out the best way to get the job done. If they see things that they think will work, they'll add them to the sort of install. And then if it seems clear that it's not working, they'll pare it down and try to keep things simple. That seemed to be a priority for him. And it's about finding things that work for Notre Dame's offenses versus various defenses, rather than finding various things that work for Notre Dame's offense and then having to find out later, how do we attack this defense based on what we want to do? They want to be experts in what they do and be able to apply those things against the various defenses that Notre Dame will see, because that is one of the challenges of the Notre Dame job. When you're not playing in a conference, you're not seeing the same kind of teams that are built the same kind of ways to stop the same kind of offenses within their conference. Notre Dame has to play a lot of different kinds of defenses, and we saw plenty of that this past season against Notre Dame, and I'm sure that will be like that until the end of time, or Notre Dame joining a conference, whatever comes first. Those were my biggest takeaways. I mean, I wasn't surprised that Gerad Parker presented well. I wasn't surprised like the passion with which Marcus Freeman spoke about Gerad Parker. It's been a weird process to get here. But this is the decision. This is what's made, and we will judge Gerad Parker and his ability to be an offensive coordinator based on the results, rather than like what Andy Ludwig is doing at Utah or what Colin Klein is doing at Kansas State. Like this needs to speak for itself, and then we can sort of rehash history from there if we want to in the future. But right now, we need to give Gerad Parker a chance and see what he has. And it doesn't mean everyone has to agree with the decision, but that's where we're at now. And that is what we'll be basing our analysis on, is what he implements and how it's executed moving forward.
So I think 2 points I want to make before we kind of turn our attention to Marcus as part of this is, one, I've had some comments from people that have said, would any other Power 5 school in this offseason hire Gerad Parker as their offensive coordinator? I don't think there would have been a lot based on his resume. I think what makes him more valuable to Notre Dame is Marcus's knowledge of his potential, and also Jared's knowledge of Notre Dame's system, his alignment with what Notre Dame wants to do. And that doesn't mean he's going to be a success. You know, we're going to, my reservations about Gerad, and again, I thought he was really impressive today, is when you get to the big games like Ohio State, USC, and Clemson, can he be a difference maker in those games? Because that's really where Notre Dame's program is right now, is winning those big stage games. And does he have enough experience? Does he have enough octane in the tank to win those games? So those are questions that we can't answer until we actually play those games. As far as Marcus today, Freeman, he talked a lot about the process, and we've written about this in bits and pieces, but just to kind of condense it a little bit, he really wants to run what he calls a pro style offense, which is has NFL concepts in it. How it looks, the way Notre Dame will express it, it'll be a balanced offense. And it'll be an evolution of what Tommy Rees has already started, not really a carbon copy of it. Had Tommy Rees stayed for a fourth season as offensive coordinator, his task would have also been evolving his offense to look more like the teams that we see in the playoff. And Marcus being a stickler for that and not veering from that eliminated a lot of really good candidates in the search process. It really, he said, it came down, he saw film of Kansas State and Utah and said, that's what I'm looking for. And then obviously what Notre Dame did, which brought Gerad Parker into the mix. So you really had a smaller pool of really viable candidates based on that criteria.
Yeah, I wanted to mention, I talked about how Parker, his influence at West Virginia was red zone based. I figured I'd share some of the stats that sort of show that. And I mean, stats can always lead you one way or the other. And I think you can always find stats to support or go against your argument. So in 2019, which is the year before Gerad Parker joined West Virginia's staff, the Mountaineers ranked 119 in the FBS in total offense, 116 in scoring offense, and 118 in red zone offense. And then in his first season as offensive coordinator, which, as we mentioned, he was not calling the plays, he was calling some red zone plays primarily. The offense went all the way up to number 50 in total offense. The scoring wasn't great. It was 82nd in scoring offense, but then the red zone offense bumped all the way up to number 35 in the FBS. And then in the second season, the total offense and scoring offense struggled, both in 88 in total offense and 88 in scoring offense. But then the red zone offense still continued to improve. It went up to number 18 with a 90% scoring rate in the red zone. So we're like getting very fine focused and looking for very specific things because there's just not a big resume of play calling that we can pull from with Gerad Parker. But there are signs that at least some of the ideas and concepts that he was implementing at West Virginia were improving what he was sort of handed. Now, who deserves all that credit? We could sit here and debate for days, but
oh gosh, no.
Yeah, I don't think we're interested in doing that, but I think it's just worth sharing because I think it doesn't take a lot of effort to sort of downplay this promotion for Gerad Parker and explain all the reasons why it's not the right decision. But and I don't know that I don't know that it is the best hire, to be honest. That doesn't mean it won't end up working out, but it seems like a pretty big risk. And but it's one that obviously Marcus Freeman is comfortable with. And I mean, if it doesn't work out, it's going to fall on Marcus Freeman just as much as it's going to fall on Gerad Parker. So this is Marcus Freeman's tenure that is seemingly at stake too. I mean, you'd like to think he'd be able to survive one bad offensive coordinator hire, but you never know with how things work out. So it's and obviously from Notre Dame's point of view, they hope it's not a bad hire and it works out fine. And it certainly can. So I think I don't know that myself personally am like fully convicted into the other direction that, wow, this is a great hire. This is where Marcus Freeman didn't even need to bring Colin Klein and Andy Ludwig on the campus. He should have just handed the reins over to Gerad Parker right away. But I think I'm interested in sort of what the combination of him as offensive coordinator and Gino Guidugli, who's yet to be officially named as the quarterback's coach, can be for Notre Dame's offense and what that ends up looking like.
So my thoughts and my answer to that too, as far as how good is Gerad Parker going to be, I think there's a couple things that pop up. One is if he if this turns out to be not a good hire, would Marcus do what Dabo Sweeney did and cut it off after 1 year? I think that's kind of an interesting question. And the other thing I want to point out with Marcus is he sees a lot of Gerad in himself. They were together at Purdue, and Purdue was miserable on both sides of the ball. Marcus's last year, he was the defensive coordinator, at least co-defensive coordinator there in 2016. That was the year where Darrell Hazel, their head coach, got fired in the middle of the season, and Gerad became the interim head coach and lost all 6 games as the interim head coach. But I mean, they were 9-49 in their 4 years, 3-30, I think, in the Big Ten. I mean, it was just miserable football. And even Marcus's first year at Cincinnati, he wasn't lighting the world on fire, and then he did. And I think that's what Marcus saw in how Gerad went about his business at Purdue when they were together for 4 years. That was a big impression. And then when he heard him in the job interview, he didn't even want to finish the job interview. He wanted to say you're hired, but he had to restrain himself in the middle of it. That's how excited he was about that. So we'll see how that works out. I think the other thing with Marcus that I wanted to kind of get a read on today was, did he feel supported in this process? And a lot of people could say, well, you know what? Jack Swarbrick, the athletic director, and Ron Paulus, who's an associate athletic director in charge of football, were sitting in the press conference. What was he going to say? Marcus comes off pretty authentic. I think he certainly had conviction the way he talked. Is there some gray area there? I don't know. I mean, the whole thing about the buyout with Andy Ludwig is very gray. But Marcus went to bat for his athletic director today. I talked to someone off the record that knows Marcus pretty well, and he was certainly convinced that Marcus felt that he was well supported, that he was excited, genuinely excited, and he wasn't trying to spin the Gerad Parker hire to him. Again, that doesn't mean all this is going to work out, right, but I think it lends some credence to because Marcus went out of his way to address a lot of that stuff today. He didn't wait for us to ask questions. He didn't say, we don't want to. We're thinking about the future. We're not going to go backwards with this process. He was open to answering every question. And that to me says something. But again, there's going to be skeptics about how well or how poorly this was handled. But I think it's very important for Marcus to feel supported. If Marcus was disappointed with the process, then I think Notre Dame would have had some problems.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I mean, he flatly said, like, hey, and I'm not exactly sure the exact quote, but he's like, the Kansas State and Utah offensive coordinators turned us down. Like that was how he framed it. He didn't say, like, we moved on from this guy because of this, or it got complicated because of this. He is fine with, like, he's not like running away from, there was a want for those guys, and it wasn't they weren't able to sort of cross the finish line and make that happen. So I think that was interesting. I know that was one of the questions I wanted to ask Marcus Freeman, but I didn't get the mic before the press conference was ended. Was sort of, and it's something, Eric, you and I have talked about. I don't know if it was on the podcast or the day we were trying to prepare for our podcast. Is just Marcus Freeman is known as a dogged recruiter, and so how does that influence what he's like as a head coach trying to hire someone? If there's some hesitation with Andy Ludwig taking the job, how quickly does he move on to Gerad Parker? It seems, based on how things have played out, that he did move on pretty quickly. And why was that? Why wouldn't he keep fighting for Andy Ludwig if he really wanted him? Or was he just that convinced that Andy Ludwig wasn't coming? And that adds to some of the gray area in terms of is this as everything seems? Is everyone being completely transparent with what happened here? Because Marcus Freeman, I don't think at least from recruits, like, an initial no isn't going to stop him from continuing to try to get those recruits on campus and understanding Notre Dame better. And obviously Andy Ludwig got to Notre Dame and got the Notre Dame experience, but it didn't work out in the end. So I thought it was interesting how Marcus Freeman handled it, and he did not shy away from it. He got pretty fiery when it came to being asked about like Andy Ludwig's appearance at the hockey game, and sort of equated that to, is like, listen, if we have recruits on campus, we're going to take them to a hockey game too. And they have. That's not something that he didn't just make that up. It's something they have done. But to me, I think it's a little bit different, but especially my counter to that would be like, well, you guys also have a policy about like guys that are committed elsewhere and not coming for official visits. So it's like if that guy's employed by Utah, it's a little bit different to bring him on campus during an interview process and parade him around publicly than bringing a recruit who's not committed anywhere and taking them to a hockey game. So I think there is a little bit of a difference there. But I think he felt confident that they were going to get Andy Ludwig at that point. I don't think, like, even though he said it that way, like obviously they're not confident they're going to get all those recruits either. But I don't think if he was confident that it would end up in Notre Dame's favor, that it would have been handled in the same way. I think at that point they thought that this could be Notre Dame's next offensive coordinator, and obviously that's not how it played out.
Right, and I will massage the term paraded around, because he was sitting in a private box, not hiding, but he wasn't driving the Zamboni between periods. He wasn't taking the shot from center ice for the scholarship. You know?
Yeah, but my thought of that is like, okay, the people he was caught on camera by like Peacock and like the in-stadium or the in-arena like video people.
Well, and it was Notre Dame's video people.
Right. And so if Notre Dame didn't want that to happen, they probably could have made that. Like someone could have told like, hey, Marcus is with the Utah offensive coordinator. Let's not put him on the Jumbotron tonight.
Yeah.
Or let's make sure he's not on the Peacock broadcast. Like that could have happened if they wanted to keep it that way. And obviously they did. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was obviously made public in sort of through like avenues that Notre Dame has some control over. I would say it wasn't just like some random fan like took a photo of Andy Ludwig in the crowd, and that's how it was discovered that he was there.
Right. Before we move on to the quarterback's coach that's pending, and I do think that's an interesting dynamic in all this big picture stuff. I would say, first of all, if you still ask me who my preference would have been to hire out of those three, I think Andy Ludwig had the highest upside and had the lowest risk. And I still think that even after hearing Gerad today. But I was very impressed with Gerad today. And honestly, I think I would probably have hired Colin Klein, although he wasn't really deep in experience.
Right.
But a lot of the things they did at Kansas State I thought was pretty cool. This is a column I wrote last week. I think wherever you stand on the buyout story, and there were two really sets of reality. Did Notre Dame balk at the buyout and then try to go back in and make nice and get Andy Ludwig at the end? Or did they never balk at the buyout and he just went back to Utah, kind of got cold feet about wanting to go to Notre Dame and decided to stay home, or decided to be indecisive? I mean, there are two sets of reality, but whatever the real one is, what you have now, though, is Jack Swarbrick and Marcus Freeman on the record saying buyouts aren't going to be in the future, and you've got another coaching search going on for offensive line coach. They're not going to be an issue in the future. So, and that Notre Dame is fully committed to winning national championships, doing what it takes to, to do financially. Again, whether you believe that or not, they're on the record and they've got to be held accountable moving forward. And I think that's a positive thing that'll come out of this. I'm really curious to see who ends up as offensive line coach. We've got that on the agenda to talk about. Do we need to jump to any questions before we jump into Gino Guidugli?
This one isn't related to any specific coach, so we can throw it in here now. It's connected to the search and the opinions about what happened or didn't happen with the buyout situation. Jerry McClurg asked, why does the academic side of Notre Dame feel, I guess I'm assuming where this is coming from, it could be unrelated, but asked, why does the academic side of ND feel that ND can't be both an outstanding academic institution and a football powerhouse?
I don't know that that's I don't think that that's what generally the feeling is. I do think sometimes there's the feeling that yeah, we think we can do both, but then there's not maybe enough middle ground to help that happen.
Right.
And the example I'll use is the transfer portal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, getting a grad transfer in is easy. Getting a freshman in good standing isn't terribly difficult, especially if it's somebody that Notre Dame admissions had approved the first time. It's when you start getting into the area where that student will have more credits from their old school than Notre Dame and is going to get a Notre Dame degree. That's where it gets sticky. And I think this is an area where there needs to continue to be discussion. So, in that example, Jerry, I think I can see why you have that impression. I don't think it's a blanket impression, but I think that's certainly an area where you can point to and say there needs to be, and there have been ongoing discussions about it. It's just, I don't know that we've moved more than very small incrementally toward a more liberal policy.
All right, let's we have a couple questions related to Gino Guidugli, so let's start with those and then we can maybe fill in the blanks
Okay.
after that. First one is from Ron Robert. Has Coach Guidugli been officially announced as hired and joining the staff? Is there a backup if he does change his mind?
Gino has not been announced because he has to go through that vetting process and gets the pretty little graphic and all that stuff. And it takes a little bit longer for him than Parker because Parker was already on staff. So they were able to move through that pretty quickly. I think they're probably pretty close to announcing him. And is there a backup if he changes his mind? Well, I mean, he's changed his mind once. He was going from Cincinnati to Wisconsin, and Notre Dame was able to poach him from Wisconsin's new staff. I think Notre Dame would have to at least interview some different people. I think Gino was a guy that instantly came to mind and seemed like a match right away, and they were able to make this happen pretty quick. So I don't anticipate him changing his mind. I know that I believe that there's an opening out there that he could be interested in. Is it Cincinnati?
Yeah, that's leads right into this question from Michael Collins. With the Cincinnati offensive coordinator job opening up today, is there concern that Coach Guidugli might go back to his alma mater? I know Coach Satterfield calls plays, but at UC, he'd be the OC versus QB coach. Hope he stays.
Yeah, I think, I mean, he went to Wisconsin not being the OC there.
Right.
Because he wanted another challenge. He wanted to coach on a higher level. He was passing game coordinator and tight ends coach, actually. So he was willing to take, not the ideal position. He was quarterbacks coach and offensive coordinator at Cincinnati when he left.
Right.
So I don't think that that's going to be, I think he feels like I'm speaking for a guy I haven't been introduced to, but psychically, I think that he, based on the move to Wisconsin, that he, being involved in the Notre Dame offense the way he is, getting a chance to coach Sam Hartman this year, getting a chance to probably coach CJ Carr when he comes in, and that seems on track. I think is something that he'd really value. So Cincinnati is going to be a Power 5 team here very soon. In fact, I think this coming year they're joining the Big 12. So they're going to have better resources. They're going to be able to pay people better. It's going to be a better job. The jobs at Cincinnati will be better. But again, I think Gino will stick with his Notre Dame commitment.
Yeah, I mean, Notre Dame has the connections to him to lean on. I think they feel pretty confident that he would come to Notre Dame because of their relationships with him. Obviously, he has ties to Cincinnati. He doesn't have ties to Scott Satterfield in any way that I'm aware of. So it would be very strange to sort of just have this circuitous route to just have the same job that he had with to begin with. So just to work for a different head coach at the same place. So that on paper, it seems like it wouldn't make a lot of sense, but I suppose you can't totally rule anything out. But I don't think there's any real hesitation or worry from Notre Dame's point of view that Gino Guidugli won't be its quarterback's coach next season.
So as far as Gino, who is Gino? Do you want me to talk about him, or do you want to give the thumbnail sketch on Gino?
I could give the quick thumbnail. I mean,
okay.
So to be like really quick, Gino Guidugli. What I'm most interested about Gino Guidugli is his resume is basically Desmond Ridder is
right, and 1 year of Ben Bryant,
and 1 year of Ben Bryant, which didn't go that hot. And Ben Bryant, strangely enough, was a Cincinnati quarterback, transferred to Eastern Michigan because he wasn't playing behind Desmond Ridder, and then came back to Cincinnati. So obviously, Gino Guidugli is a likable enough guy that Ben Bryant would come back to him after leaving him. I think that's sort of interesting. It may say something about his personality that I think maybe a positive. But yeah, Ben Bryant's season didn't go well. And Desmond Ridder was like a nobody. He was I believe a 2-star quarterback coming out of high school, according to Rivals, out of the Louisville area, and started for 4 years at Cincinnati and became an NFL draft pick, led Cincinnati to the college football playoff. So
and beat Notre Dame.
Yeah, and also beat Notre Dame. So who gets more credit for that? Is this a Desmond Ridder story, or is this a Gino Guidugli story? Obviously, the most realistic thing, it's a little bit of both. Like one wouldn't be where they are without the other, probably. And so I'm curious to see, like, okay, what does Desmond Ridder's career arc mean about what Gino Guidugli is as a quarterback's coach, and how does that impact and elevate Sam Hartman, and then moving beyond Sam Hartman, the future of Notre Dame's quarterbacks room in terms of developing Tyler Buckner, developing Kenny Minchey, CJ Carr down the line, Steve Angeli, all those guys that are next in line there. So he doesn't have a long resume. He was at Central Michigan before that, and was running backs coach for a time. He started his career as a running backs coach started his Cincinnati tenure as a running backs coach. So
replacing Gerad Parker.
Replacing Gerad Parker.
Who was there a couple months.
Very short stint. So he also, Smoking Scott points out rightfully that he was a quarterback at Cincinnati and is their all-time passing leader. He has the record for career and season, I believe, in attempts, completions, and yards for passing yards. And then he had the career passing touchdowns record. But Desmond Ridder ended up beating him, the quarterback he coached. So kind of a cool story there. He was like of the inaugural Ring of Honor in Nippert Stadium for the University of Cincinnati. So a guy that knows the position because he played it at a high level. He wasn't necessarily an NFL caliber quarterback. He had a brief stint there and ended up in the Canadian Football League and various arena football leagues.
A long time in the Arena Football League.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to his level of football. Like you don't just like, it's not, you're not just paying bills by doing that. Like you are obsessed with football if that's what you want your career to be, and chasing the dream to continue to play football at those levels. So that's sort of the thumbnail of Gino Guidugli. Is there anything that I left out there that you think's worth adding that stood out to you from like his resume?
He's 39 years old, if we didn't say that, and he's from Fort Thomas, Kentucky, which is right across the river from Cincinnati. And yeah, the long arena football resume, which is interesting. So and he's well thought of. I mean, I've had people reach out to me the past few days that really feel good about Gino. I talked to Mike Denbrock, or we texted, I should say. Mike is down at LSU with Brian Kelly as his offensive coordinator now, but he was the offensive coordinator at Cincinnati when Gino was the quarterback's coach, and he had very good things to say about Gino. He thought that was a really good hire for Notre Dame. So
Yeah, I think you read the text off to me, and it was just like it was a long list of his positive
Yeah.
attributes. So I was like, oh, I guess that sounds pretty good. I think we know where Mike Denbrock stands on Gino
Right.
Guidugli, so that's a good sign. And obviously, there's familiarity with Notre Dame staff, and I have heard some similar things from people that had worked with him at Cincinnati of sort of his attitude. What is he like as a recruiter? Doesn't have like a huge, like I think he signed 1 4-star recruit as a quarterback from his time at Cincinnati. But Cincinnati has only like now sort of creeped into maybe feeling like it or it should be getting 4-star quarterbacks. And so I wouldn't necessarily hold that against him that he wasn't like signing 4-star quarterbacks annually at Cincinnati. But certainly there will be a demand to do that at Notre Dame. But I think he sounds like he's a pretty relatable guy and can relate to guys on the recruiting trail and on the field as well.
When we get a chance to talk to Sam Hartman, I'm not sure if it's going to be this week. I'm keeping my fingers crossed because it's been delayed a few times. If Gino's named by then, I think then we'll be able to lock that in. I think it'll be interesting to talk to him. And then once CJ Carr has had a chance to come back to Notre Dame for a visit and really get to know him pretty well, I think then it'll be worth checking in with CJ. But right now it feels like he's locked in. That the Tommy Rees departure was something he expected, maybe not this early, but he expected. And so right now he's recruiting very hard for Notre Dame in the 2024 class.
Yeah. Jason Smith's on board. He says Gino and Gerad are going to do the work necessary to make Marcus Freeman look good for these hires, in his opinion. I think it's important to note, like, whenever someone is hired because, or at least in part because of a connection that they have with a coach, there's maybe a wonder, is like, well, did they earn this spot? I don't think, I have no evidence to indicate that like these guys aren't hard workers, that they're not going to put in the effort to make Notre Dame as good as they hope it can be, and that it's not like these guys just sort of fell backwards into these positions. Like they've gotten to where they're at in their careers by hard work, and not just because they know Marcus Freeman. Like that's not why they have ended up in these positions. So it is funny to look at like the old Cincinnati coaching staffs from 2018, 2019, 2020. It's like, man, I made a joke on Twitter that Notre Dame should endow one of the Cincinnati assistant coaching positions because it seems to be a bit of a training ground for Notre Dame right now. But I think every indication we've received is that these are guys that are real. I mean, they're football guys. Like they put their heart and soul into trying to make the players better, and really will be taking the opportunities that are presented to them at Notre Dame very seriously and to heart. And I think part of that is like, they don't want him to let Marcus Freeman down. Like he is someone that I've never spoken to Gino about him, but Gerad Parker speaks very highly of Marcus Freeman and what he's done for him, not only just as a coach, but just as a friend, and how they grew together as young coaches and grew together as young men, and having families and stuff like that. So I think that can go a long way in sort of working for someone that you want to go to bat for at all times, and never second guess sort of the leadership that's above you.
One other, before we move on to the offensive line search, that I wanted to make a point of was, this is different than what Tommy Rees' situation was, where the quarterback's coach, the offensive coordinator, and the offensive play caller were all the same person. They are two different people. There were times with Brian Kelly, they were three different people. Kelly was calling plays. He had an offensive coordinator and a quarterback's coach early in his time at Notre Dame. At times, Mike Denbrock was a tight ends coach for Notre Dame, or wide receivers coach at different times. So can that work? I think it works better when the head coach is spending more of his time on the offense, that's his background. I think it can certainly work, but there has to be really great communication, collaboration. So that's something to keep an eye on as we move through spring practice.
So you think it would work better by having a third voice in there versus just the two voices?
I think it'd be better if you could be a fixer.
Okay, I got
If you
you.
had the ability to be a fixer. We
So like,
had
if you identify like, okay, these guys clearly aren't on the same page, or there's something going on
right,
here so I need to step in and like solve that for
correct.
them versus them having to figure it out on their own. Okay.
Right. For example, I think there was some competitiveness between Mike Sanford and Mike Denbrock. Mike Denbrock was calling the plays, and Mike Sanford was the quarterback's coach. And I think he felt like he should have been calling the plays. And Brian Kelly, if you remember, wasn't real upfront about who was calling the plays for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah.
He was like, "Well, it's an alliance, we're all collaborating, and there's
Collaboration. That's the play calling hot word, collaboration. It's a collab, and I think even Gerad Parker said something about this offense will be a collaborative effort, but
right."
he seemingly will be the play caller, and that's not necessarily in question.
So that's going to be something that's going to be interesting to watch. Can they make that a positive? I remember talking to Brady Quinn about it, and he said the most important connection, whether your offensive coordinator is the tight ends coach or the quarterback's coach, is the offensive play caller for the quarterback. So Sam Hartman's going to have a really good connection with both of those guys, I think, to have the year that he wants to have in his sixth year of college and his first year at Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I asked Gerad Parker about Sam Hartman, and sort of how much he's prioritized like getting on the same page with him, and he tried to be like all encompassing, like not like, because I don't think he wants to like his first day as offensive coordinator say, yeah, Sam Hartman's are going to be our starting quarterback, but
Yeah.
He's like, I get why, like, it was a big deal for him to come here. He made a different decision than everyone else, and that he could have been in any number of different places right now. And he came to Notre Dame under a different set of circumstances, and there could be some hesitation of like, okay, what am I getting myself into? Like, do I trust these guys with accomplishing what I had hoped to get done here in my one season at Notre Dame? And so that will certainly be important, whether or not Notre Dame wants to say like, okay, Sam Hartman is the guy that we need to emphasize right now. It is important because for Notre Dame to be as best as it can be this coming season, it's going to involve Sam Hartman maximizing his potential and really elevating the offense that Gerad Parker puts into place.
Absolutely. So we have one other. So Marcus, since he's been the head coach, the offensive coordinator search was his 8th. Gino Guidugli was his 9th, and offensive line is his 10th. And I know that a lot of people, including me, are framing how important this offensive coordinator hire is. I think the offensive line hire is huge as well, given the standing that Harry Hiestand had with this team in both his tours of duty at Notre Dame, and culturally what it meant, and how much Notre Dame is tight end you, but they are offensive line you to a certain extent. At least they're in that upper tier of Michigan, Alabama, Georgia, year in and year out, pretty much. And they need to continue to be if Marcus Freeman's offenses are going to take off like he hopes they are. So let's get into the offensive line search.
Yeah, you've sort of driven our coverage of that so far, and I know we don't have a lot of answers at this point, but what have you learned about where Notre Dame's at with the offensive line search, offensive line coach search, and what are you when you look at potential candidates, what are the things that you think have started to stand out to you in terms of potential fits for Notre Dame?
Right. So they're not rushing through this, but there's a sense of urgency. You got, spring practice starting next month. And that I was told that, that it was even possible they might have brought a person in for an in-person interview this weekend. I think we'll see that very soon. And that the probably the earliest that things could wrap up would be middle of the week this week, but I don't think we're talking weeks. I don't think we're talking a long drawn out process. There has been incredible response to the offensive coordinator or offensive line opening.
Yeah,
And
I think Gerad Parker said the list was longer than a page.
yeah. And when you look at the candidates, they kind of fall into different categories. And I would say, when I listed 8, I think there's many more out there. I tried to 6, 7, 8. Yeah, I try to narrow it down to 8 to realistic and give you a cross section of the different types of people they're looking at. So let's look at one, Joe Rudolph. I think Joe Rudolph would be my number one choice based on his track record, based on experience. Joe was at Virginia Tech this past year, and Virginia Tech's offense wasn't very good. But leading up to that, he had a 7-year run of elite development at Wisconsin. He left Wisconsin for Virginia Tech. And you think about all the guys that have gone to the NFL in the last 7 or 8 years from Wisconsin. He did a really good job. So I like that. You look at guys that are kind of up and comers, even if they're, at different age groups. Brian Callahan at Minnesota is a guy that's really kind of come into light lately. He came from Western Michigan with PJ Fleck, and he's done a really good job up at Minnesota. And then Cody Kennedy is a young guy. I think he's 33. He's from Arkansas. He's a Sam Pittman clone, and learning from a great teacher in Sam Pittman. And he's making a lot of money. Those are the kind of guys, do you want to go with a kind of a rising star kind of guy? There's, kind of the long shots, and that would be someone like Matt Luke, who was at Georgia for a couple years as their offensive line coach after he got fired as the head coach at Ole Miss. Really great at Georgia. He was O-line coach in their first of their back-to-back national championships,
right,
and then stepped away because of family reasons. Does he want to get back into it? He's still fairly young. He's 46. Chris Watt, I think, is a real long shot. He absolutely, if there's a protege out there of Harry Hiestand, it's Chris, but he has basically 4 years of coaching experience after his NFL career was over. And only one of those was a full-time coach, and that was at Tulane. Only one of those was with Harry Hiestand, although he played a couple years. His last couple years were with Harry. And then you have the familiarity gang, and we've seen the familiarity come into play with some of the other coaches. Ron Crook was an offensive line coach at Cincinnati with some of these other guys, Guidugli and Marcus. He's at South Dakota now, I think, looking for the next big opportunity. Didn't want to go to Wisconsin or wasn't asked. I'm not sure which it was. Darryl Funk at BYU. There was Gerad Parker and Marcus Freeman both worked with him at Purdue, cross paths with him. And then Scott Huff is kind of in a category all his own. He's a guy that doesn't move around a lot and is really good. He's at Washington. He's been at Boise State and Washington. So like in 16 years of being an offensive line coach, he's been 2 places, and it's not because he hasn't been in demand. So do you want somebody like that that's going to stay a long time? I think what you don't want is somebody that's just going to do this as a stepping stone that really doesn't care about the culture, but just wants to get his name out there and get a better job. Harry wasn't aspiring to be the next head football coach at Notre Dame. He loved offensive line, and the offensive line loved him back. And so they need to kind of find a guy like that that's out there.
Yeah, I think the 2 from the list that you have there that I liked the most was Joe Rudolph and Darryl Funk. I like the combination of their resumes and fit potential at Notre Dame and what Notre Dame wants to do. I think there's a lot of good candidates out there. I've said this before, that the biggest reason that I have the hesitation about promoting Chris Watt is that this is the Notre Dame offensive line job. This feels like one of 2 or 3 jobs on Notre Dame staff that you should have very qualified, experienced candidates for, that you should be able to hire whenever and pull out from wherever, because of the prestige of that position and what that coach is inheriting at Notre Dame. So I that's the way I'm leading in terms of preference. And we'll see how that continues to play along. But we had an offensive line coach question from Smoking Scott. For the O-line coach hire, should Marcus Freeman look for someone with experience at multiple levels like Adazio, Gilbert, or Devlin? And obviously those guys didn't make your list. So I imagine those wouldn't. You don't see that as an important thing. What are your thoughts on that, Eric?
Harry did have some NFL experience. He was mostly a college coach. I don't think that hurt, or I don't think that hurts the resume. I was surprised that, I mean, at a much longer list, I pared down to 8. There were 0 of them. I didn't put Adazio on the list just because I vetted him with some people that think he's basically cooked, that he would not be an effective offensive line coach. I know he's at Texas A&M now, but I mean, he's been a head coach. They said he's been cooked since Boston College, which is a few stops ago. So
now I hope he becomes the coach just so we can replay that line.
Well, I mean, I tried to talk to people that I respected who know way more about offensive line play than me.
Yeah.
And that was the response I got.
Yeah, I mean, the NFL thing, like, I don't think it matters. I mean, it maybe flies in the face of the idea that Notre Dame's running a pro-style offense. So why wouldn't you want like pro-level NFL?
I think as offensive coordinator, it would have been a plus,
right?
But I don't think any of those guys. I know Klein wasn't in the pros coaching. I don't think Andy was either.
No, he wasn't. And so, like, there's nothing about like Gerad Parker's resume that seems to like you need to. It would be helpful to have NFL experience to be able to coach the offensive line for Gerad Parker. So I don't see that as necessary. I think, I mean, honestly,
people would love to have Andy Heck, a former All-American who's been coaching at Kansas City for the last 10 years and has coached pretty much in the pros his whole career, but he's in his mid-50s and he hasn't been a college coach since he was a grad assistant at Virginia. I just don't see him having an interest. And even then he would have to, get used to recruiting and things.
Yeah. He's winning. I mean, he's only winning Super Bowls and blocking for Patrick Mahomes. So I think that it's hard to imagine a much better situation.
Life is too easy. I need a bigger challenge. I need to follow Harry Heastand.
While we're talking about offensive line, I can transition that into a little bit of recruiting talk. Today we learned that Ian Moore, who's a 2024 offensive lineman from New Palestine. I don't remember how they say it in Indiana, because in Indiana we don't say anything how it's said elsewhere.
Exactly. Like Milan, which is Milan in Italy.
Right. And how do they say Peru? It's Peru, I think, or something.
Is it really?
I think so. Yeah. There's all kinds of weird oddities across this great state of ours. But to the point, Ian Moore, who's been committed to Ohio State since October, is ranked by Rivals as the #1 overall offensive tackle in the 2024 class. He had not received a Notre Dame offer while Harry Heastand was on staff, and he has since recently received a Notre Dame offer. He confirmed that with me today. I told our Inside ND Sports subscribers that on the Insider Lounge. And then he also told me when I asked him, do you think you will consider Notre Dame? And he said, no, sir. So he's pretty straightforward of where he's at with that now. Like, obviously, he didn't even know which Notre Dame coach reached out to his head coach to explain that he had an offer. And it doesn't really make much of a difference yet because Notre Dame doesn't have an offensive line coach in place. And so we have to wait to see like how much Notre Dame pursues him once the new offensive line coach gets there, if that person can sort of crack into this shell that Ian Moore has had, not just to Notre Dame, but from other schools trying to poach him away from Ohio State. He's been very firm in his commitment and has been vocal to that, about that to our Ohio State rival site. So it wasn't necessarily surprising to hear him say that, but it's worth passing along. And no, Jason Smith, yeah, he isn't interested in Notre Dame as of now. He's committed to Ohio State, so it's going to be hard to do that. I know if it's an in-state lineman, you think, well, maybe there's a chance, but I can understand there being maybe some hard feelings there that Notre Dame didn't feel conviction in offering before then. But obviously, the new offensive line coach can explain that away and say, hey, that wasn't me. It wasn't my decision. And even some people on Notre Dame staff can say, hey, we deferred to Harry, and Harry felt this way. And so we always thought you should have had an offer or whatever. Like Notre Dame can spin it in their favor moving forward. But I don't have a sense that it will work out for Notre Dame, but there's plenty of time for that to change. Notre Dame has also offered a couple other offensive linemen. One name is escaping me from Kansas City. The other one is Brandon Baker from Mater Dei High School out in California. So Notre Dame doesn't have an offensive line coach yet, but the recruiting staff is working hard to continue to reach out to potential offensive linemen to make sure there's not sort of a drop off there as Notre Dame's in transition from offensive line coaches.
So what else do we have cooking with recruiting? Are there some visits getting lined up for once we get out of this February dead period?
Yeah, so Notre Dame expects to be hosting kids for visits through the back half of March, mostly because that's when Notre Dame will be practicing for spring practice. And if you're going to get a kid here in March, it's better to have them on campus when there's practice than to just experience the cold weather that is that we get here in March in South Bend. So that'll be the strategy moving forward for there. And then, yeah, some visits are getting lined up for April. And that's sort of where Notre Dame's at in terms of trying to line things up. I think the target lists are shifting a little bit in terms of Notre Dame figuring out who it prefers, which of the recruits prefer Notre Dame. I mean, I think even since Notre Dame's junior day, when it last hosted recruits on campus, there have been developments that are shifting who Notre Dame is prioritizing. I have just today wrote a story about the cornerbacks that Notre Dame is targeting in the 2024 class. It already has 2 commitments. There's about 4 that they're really focused on right now. One of those, John Mitchell, intends to be on campus in March. So that'll be a name to watch there at the cornerback position. And then sometime this week, I'm hoping to write a safety story. I actually included the names that are the most important at the safety position on the Insider Lounge. So if you're interested in that information, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already to InsideNDSports.com, and you can access that information before the story gets put up. And yeah, I will continue to expand those lists. That's something I really want to work on, is try to get some more names lined up for us in terms of who Notre Dame believes is going to be on campus, which recruits are reaching out to line up visits for March and April, because it'll be an important time for Notre Dame to sort of keep that momentum going and spinning forward. But everything's going well so far with the guys that are committed. I know with coaching changes, there's always a concern about what's going to happen with the guys that are committed, but there hasn't really been any significant reason to believe that any of Notre Dame's committed players are considering somewhere else right now.
Well, and they won't be able to go to hockey games. They'll have to find something else to do.
Yeah, the hockey season is ending.
The one thing I asked Gerad Parker 2 things. We got 2 questions, but one of the things I asked him about was, did he see his recruiting role expanding? Because basically, you're the tight ends coach. It's not an arduous job. You're recruiting the best of the tight ends, and that's usually easy to get their attention. And then usually have a geographical area. And as the offensive coordinator, you really need to be involved in a lot of the recruitments. And that is his anticipation, that he would support the position coaches, but yeah, he would, and still recruit tight ends, but that he needs to get more involved. And I think, there was a big change in Tommy Rees in that area when Marcus became the head coach, that Tommy was a lot more involved and a lot more effective, I think, in his recruitment. Billy Schrouth was a Marcus Freeman, Tommy Rees special, because Harry wasn't on the staff yet when they got Billy right at the end of that cycle. So that's going to be part of the recruiting moving forward, is larger role from Gerad. And again, we'll learn more about how good of a recruiter he is. I mean, certainly he's been able to get in his foot in the door with the tight ends that they've been recruiting. Jack Larson's committed, and they've been looking at some other tight ends in the 24 class. But it's a small sample size, so we'll have to see.
And LDL Go Irish on the Insider Lounge submitted a few questions. We don't have time to get to all of them. Some of them are fairly big picture, so I don't want to try to squeeze them all in here at the end. But the one that I wanted to ask you or present to you was this. I believe Tommy Rees did some great things last season. This is what LDL Go Irish is saying. He also showed a need for seasoning, i.e. experience with a mentor. Nick Saban can fill that role along with McNulty and Wisenhunt, in addition to the information from the previous offensive coordinators, O'Brien, Kiffin, and Sarkisian. Great move for Rees. Who knows? Maybe he returns to Notre Dame when Freeman replaces Day at Ohio State. Do you agree this will be good for Tommy?
Going to Alabama?
Yes.
I think it could change the trajectory of his career. I think it's a very good career move for him. It also comes with some risk because he will get eaten alive if he's not successful quickly there.
Right.
But I think he's got the potential to really supercharge his career goals, which I believe is getting into the NFL. I think he'd like to be a college head coach. I think he'd love to be an NFL offensive coordinator. And I think this particular position, if he does well, he would probably have his choice of either. So, yeah, I think it's a good move for him.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, if he was never going to spend the rest of his career at Notre Dame, that never really seemed realistic as someone who's as young as he is and who has so many coaching years ahead of him. So why not take the jump at Alabama of all schools, in a program that has had so much success with offensive coordinators on an annual basis that even when folks are deemed unsuccessful, as Bill O'Brien apparently has been, who had a Heisman winning quarterback and is now an NFL offensive coordinator. Granted, he already had NFL experience before that. That's a risk worth taking. He's betting on himself. He's stepping into a demanding role, but also one that, like you said, could have big rewards for him and the trajectory of his career. So I think I don't, when Notre Dame fans like question this move or call it a lateral move, I wonder, like, okay, how much are you actually separating like your fandom from the reality of what this is? Like, I understand you're a Notre Dame fan and being an offensive coordinator would be a dream job for you for Notre Dame, but like Alabama, Nick Saban's arguably the greatest college football coach of all time. Like, why wouldn't you want to learn from him and get experience from him? Even if it goes poorly, it's not like that's going to be the end of Tommy Rees's coaching career. He might have to take a step back and then climb back up the ladder. But I think that's a move that many people in the coaching profession would make. Although people would argue, well, why were there supposedly 3 other guys that sort of turned down that opportunity at Alabama? And I don't know that I can speak for those guys.
I will. No, I'm just kidding.
All right. Tell me more. Well, that's all we have for tonight's episode of Football Never Sleeps. We appreciate everyone tuning in who tuned in live, and we appreciate everyone who will watch us on replay. I
appreciate all the questions.
Yeah, the questions are very much appreciated. The comments are appreciated. Let us know if there are topics you want us to maybe focus on in future episodes in the comment section. We appreciate any sort of feedback we can get, unless it is wardrobe related. We take no wardrobe suggestions. So we'll be back.
We only promise no spaghetti stains on our shirts. That's it.
We'll be back next week on a night to be determined. We're keeping this sort of flexible. So someone joked, well, why don't you call it Monday Night Live if you're doing it on Monday Night Live? But we want to keep the off-season one branded as Football Never Sleeps and move it around as we can to best fit it in with what's going on around Notre Dame and cover the topics. I'll go ahead and read that comment for you, Eric, because I know you saw it. Love you, Mr. Hansen. Your ND insight is legendary. So shout out to the Heart Foundation.
Thank you.
I feel the same way.
Is that one of my grandkids getting on the computer?
Yeah, I don't know. We're going to have to do some research on who the Heart Foundation is. But anyways, yeah, we'll be back next week. Like we said at the top of the show, make sure you're subscribed so you get the reminders of when we're coming on there, and sign up for the notifications so you know that, okay, they're going to be on Wednesday night this week. And so you can remember to seek us out when we're going to be live. We'll have Inside ND Sports podcast later this week. I don't know that will occur before Notre Dame has an offensive line coach it wants to hire, but we will keep you updated on that information on the Insider Lounge message board and with all of our content on InsideNDSports.com.